Hey guys, we're going to talk about one of the greatest rock and rollers in rock and roll history. One of probably the most underrated guys, the most unsung hero, and most unknown or forgotten about gentleman there is, and that's Mr. Jesse Hector from London, England. And Jesse Hector's mainly known for being in the Hammersmith Gorillas, which is a killer proto-punk or punk group or street rock and roll, or I like to think of them as like mods, a wild mod band just happening in the late 70s. But Jesse Hector is my favorite. Let me play a track from the Hammersmith Gorillas, and then we'll talk about him a little bit. Well, anyway, let me talk about Jesse Hector. Jesse Hector is one of the guys who understands rock and roll, the whole big picture of rock and roll and what it means and what it's all about. And he understands the freedom and passion that rock and roll can bring to you. And I find not a lot of artists out there really can grasp the whole concept. A lot of guys like what they do and they know what they do, and maybe they're nostalgic for what they grew up on, but to have the big picture, very few people I could think of, like someone like Jimmy Page understands, or Iggy Pop, or Lemmy from Motorhead, or even a Ronnie James Dio could understand, like Howlin' Wolf, to the early country, to the rock and roll originators, to garage rock, to beat mod, to the early heavy stuff in the 70s, to glam rock, to pub rock, to punk rock, to arena rock. Just to have the whole picture, like Lemmy could understand. There's a direct line from Little Richard to Judas Priest, and it's really the same. And Jesse Hector understands that whole picture, and he's just absolutely passionate about rock and roll, and I love that. But he started out as a young man in England playing a skiffle band, because that's what kids did who were into music. And he bought a record by a fella named Elvis Presley and basically changed his life. And he started a rock and roll band in the late 50s and cut some songs in the early 60s, late 50s, but they were never released until the mid 90s on this EP, Jesse Hector and the Rock and Roll Trio. And it's some wild rock and roll from England. And this was actually the first time I ever heard Jesse Hector on music. I knew of the Hammersmith Gorillas from reading articles. I've seen maybe the Chiswick comp, but the name always stuck with me in the 80s because Hammersmith's such a massive word for heavy metal kids. Like, it's this romantic faraway place in England, the Hammersmith Odeum, No Sleep to Hammersmith. But anyway, so I knew the name. I didn't actually hear them until the mid 90s through the rockabilly scene. We got this, because this is some wild rock and roll, and this is, I think, 1960 or something, and he cuts a track that sounds like it should have came from America in 1956. Echoey, primitive, and it's kind of fast, and it's got the total attitude of rock and roll, which was lacking in the Billy Furies, the Cliff Richards, and Marty Wilds, as far as in the sound of the recordings, not necessarily in their spirit, because those guys are great. But here's a early track here. Let's listen to this, if I could do this, because we're doing CDs. A couple snippets. Fast Train to Memphis. This is No Hit Records. I gotta turn it up. He was ahead of his time because he's cutting on this EP. He cut All By Myself, the Fats Domino number, but he's doing the Johnny Burnett trio version. And that wasn't a common record in England to be covering Johnny Burnett. And he's got a track called Nightmares, which is this kind of like studio thing that sounds very much like Joe Meek could have did it. But he became a mod and he was hip on the scene. He was known as the king of the mods and he looked stylish and he saw everyone, knew everyone. And I got to meet up with Jesse Hector years ago, and he was telling me stories about seeing the pretty things, you know, at the Marquee or where they were. He saw Hendrix's very early gigs in England, and just explaining it. It was just amazing. We were just talking Bo Diddley the whole time. But so he was there, and he had something to do with possibly with the band The Click, which was a great mod band from the mid-'60s. But the next recordings we know of Jesse was in 1969 when he formed a band called Crush Butler, named after the Crush Butler from when Keith Moon drove the car into the pool. And they cut some tracks in the late 60s, early 70s, which is total like, I don't know, proto-punk stoner stuff, like Lookout Black Sabbath, MC5. And I'll play a track. But anyway, that was Crush Butler, and these guys were street, urban kids that were just too powerful, too wild for the mainstream, weren't hip to any of the trends and stuff. Yeah, no one would touch them. And they kind of broke off and formed into a band called Helta Skelter that put out one recording, I think in 74, although this 45, it came out in 1977. And this is almost more of the heavy glam rock, Bubba Boy kind of sound. And this is Goodbye Baby by Helta Skelter and I Need You on the Sticky label, which is fantastic. Fantastic one-off single, Helta Skelter. But right around this time, this is when the Hammersmith Gorillas were formed, 1974. And this would be their first record, the Hammersmith Gorillas cover of The Kinks' You Really Got Me. And there's different covers on this, depending where you bought it. But this is my favorite one with the 1930s King Kong. Or 1930s. 1933, right? And there's Raw Records, 1974. Let's see if I have. Do I You Really Got Me on this? I don't know if I do. Oh, yeah. Well, they were a wild band. They had their own look. Short hair, but long sideburns, a little long on the sides. And they were kind of a cross between like the 1969 Skinheads, the Mods from 1964 to 66, and then the glam rock Bubba Boys, like Boot Boy kind of guys, put on wild shows. They headlined the very first punk rock festival with Eddie and the Hot Rods and the Damned over in Paris, I believe, or in France. And big influence on the punk bands, because when the punk bands first started, there wasn't a lot of bands for these guys to see. It was like you could see Eddie and the Hot Rod or Dr. Feelgood, or you could go see the Gorillas. And there's the Gorillas. And this is a reissue, this one. Yeah, this is a reissue one on Monster Records. And this is Gatecrasher. Gatecrasher and Gorilla Got Me. Did I show that one? I thought I had two. I have another copy. Oh, that was the first one I showed. Yeah, that's just a copy of this one. Yeah, I'm getting confused. But Jesse Hector kept playing, and he kind of, when the mod revival happened in the 80s, Jesse Hector kind of was still around, and he formed a band in late 80s, early 90s, and this is a single he put out called Jesse Hector and the Sound, and it's fantastic. And it's a fella, Gills on drums, who I had the pleasure of meeting. He's one of the earliest champions of Jesse Hector. And this is just killer stuff for 1992. And I think I have a picture. I have a picture of that's me, Jesse, and Gills meeting. I don't remember. I don't know when that was, but it was a while ago in London. Here's Jesse in, I think, 1999. Well, anyway, there's a bunch of comps. Let's see what they came out. This is, what was the first one? I don't even know. I'm so unorganized. I didn't plan this. But here's Gorilla Garage. This is all various Jesse Hector stuff. It's called the Jesse Hector Story. I'm sure it's got all pictures. Great pictures. I wish there was more footage of them. Definitely hear like Hendrix and the Who. 1999. This is a guy from the 50s, still cutting vital stuff. But they made a movie about him, a little documentary, and it's included in this one, this comp called Jesse Hector Running Wild, A Message to the World. And in here's, I think this is the CD we're listening to. Yeah, this is the CD that's in there. It's a great comp. It's got a little DVD of a documentary. It's mainly, it's got a lot of the documentaries. Actually, my wife interviewing Jesse Hector from a long time ago, and they spliced it in. But there's a copy of the DVD. And, importantly, this is the Gorillas record, their album. I'm so out of order. Message to World, 1978 on Raw Records. And this is, see the dust on there, huh? Great record. But Just Add Water, the guy who runs that label, has been a Jesse Hector champion for a long time. and they put out this great Hammersmith Gorillas, Why Wait Till Tomorrow, double LP with live stuff, and it might actually be complete Jesse Hector. Killer. And it was something called the Hammersmith Gorillas. This was the first comp, I think, on Ace Records, 1999. They were just wild live. I wish there was more footage. The guy's just walking, talking rock and roll. And this is brand new, came out in July by Just Add Water. And this is going to be his 90s output, 92 to 96. And this has some unreleased tracks on it, so I'm very happy to get this. Let's see. Well, anyway, Jesse Hector, I think, is a very important person, but lucky for him, there's enough music and enough seeds planted and enough people in the know that he's going to get his spot in rock and roll history. It's just going to take a little time, but he will be regarded as one of the guys who's carrying the torch through a lot of those dark years. And his influence, just enough in the right places to like people like Johnny Rotten, Rat Scabies, and a lot of the mod guys in the 80s, that he's got his rightful spot in rock and roll history, and he'll be right there with Iggy Pop and the Velvet Underground and stuff, at least to me, MC5. But sorry it wasn't well prepared, but that's my Jesse Hector, Hammersmith Gorillas stuff. At least maybe you could check out one of those comps.